Well, we are in a series called Ecclesiastes, The Search for Meaning. The Search for Meaning. And what I've done the last few weeks is we've been talking about a paradox of things. We talked about the paradox of production and pleasure, projects, the things that we try to build our value in and our meaning that ultimately come up empty. Last week we talked about the paradox of time, how a lot of times we let time consume us. And again, it comes up hevel or empty or fleeting. And today we're going to talk about the paradox of work, the paradox of work. So if you'll stand with me, we're going to read a very short passage today. It's Ecclesiastes chapter 4 through 6. And let's just take a minute here to settle our hearts and our minds before we enter into what the Lord is going to teach us this morning. Ecclesiastes 4 through 6. And I saw that all toil and achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, or the Hebrew word there is hevel, a chasing after the wind. Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. Let's pray. Father, as we explore this topic of labor and of work, the paradox of it, Lord, I pray that you just really speak to our hearts and minds around what you want to teach us around this important area, this important reality of our life, that we all must labor, we all must work in some way or another. How do we do this in a way that we're wise? In a way where you can teach us what it looks like to be in the paradox of work in our lives every single day. Show us the truths of these passages that we can really grab a hold of that will be transformative in our lives. That these aren't things that we just hear today and they're gone tomorrow, but things that we'll chew on, we'll wrestle with, we'll struggle with. Lord, as you bring change into our lives around how we can view labor and work in a way that honors you, in a way that gives us a healthy perspective of what it looks like to live in this world. Thank you again. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be seated. Thank you. Does anybody remember the BlackBerry storm? The phone, the BlackBerry storm? This is like early 2000s. Everyone's hands like went up real fast. Like, It was like, yeah, but I don't want anybody to know I know the BlackBerry storm. Well, if you were to go back into the early 2000s and the phone wars, remember this is back when people had not smartphones really, but flip phones and things. BlackBerry was dominating the phone marketplace. I mean, it really was the only smartphone. It had high security, easeability. I think if you worked any government contracts, all those people used to use BlackBerries. But in 2009, something was released that would completely change the phone industry. Can you guess what it is? The iPhone. That's right. 2009, the iPhone launches. Obviously, it was mildly successful. No, I mean, I think most people in here probably have an iPhone, right? It completely changed how we use and utilize and value our phones. Well, BlackBerry, knowing this, set out to defeat the Apple iPhone and poured millions of dollars in creating the BlackBerry storm. It was named within the BlackBerry world the iPhone killer, right? This is the thing that's going to take out iPhone. Now in 2026, we can kind of laugh about that. But the storm was rushed to market, and if you guys remember, it was a complete disaster. The screen glitched, there was software that was always crashing. It nearly ruined the entire company's reputation because BlackBerry was so fixated on competing with the iPhone and beating the iPhone and comparing itself to the iPhone that it completely lost its identity. It lost what made BlackBerry unique. And within a few years, their market share plummeted to zero. And I would be really surprised if anybody in here actually owns a BlackBerry still or uses one. Maybe it's in an old sock drawer somewhere, right? I think there's a lesson here that correlates with the wisdom of Ecclesiastes 4 is when you allow comparisons, jealousies, competition to be your main motivation, which Ecclesiastes 4 is teaching us that all of this is springing from these things, we risk losing our identity by our insecurities. You know, when iPhone released the iPhone, it released an insecurity within the culture of BlackBerry and saying, we can't lose what we have. We have to be the best. And what it did is it put in them a kind of a fluid motion where they lost who they actually were in the process of trying to be the best. BlackBerry became something they were never meant to be. And I found this is a good case study for the wisdom of Ecclesiastes 4 and how we can inadvertently lose who we are by looking to gain who we are in our labor, in our work. Try to find meaning in those things that we create and manufacture rather than what we can receive. So today we're going to explore the paradox of work in Ecclesiastes. If you've been following along the last month as we've been in this book, we've learned that humanity labors and toils. That's an inevitability. We all have to labor and toil, but it won't last forever, both for the good and the bad. You won't labor and toil forever under the sun. So we don't get caught up in the output, right? If we get caught up so much in the output, the Ecclesiastes teacher is looking at, well, you're not really ever going to enjoy it. You know who will enjoy it? The people who never actually worked for it will enjoy it. Kind of the paradox of Hevel here. You can spend your entire life trying to make output through your labor, but you won't fully enjoy it. So the Ecclesiastes says, enjoy it in the moment. It's a gift from God to enjoy the present moment of your labor. We hope that maybe our labor will provide for us a sense of significance. Maybe we'll leave some kind of a lasting legacy or impact that people many generations from now will be able to appreciate. But we're taught that while that might happen for a few generations, the reality is for most of us, we will be forgotten in the next few generations. After all, how many of us really know our great-grandparents? I don't even think you can even give the names of your great-grandparents potentially. But within our toil and labor, there is a deeper, I think more harmful reality that all of us struggle to confront. And it's like the teacher in Ecclesiastes is breaking that open and making us look at this area of our lives when it comes to toil. It's the deception that we can find or discover ourselves in our work, in our labor, or within our toil. That we can find that missing piece of our identity in what we create and manufacture. The teacher says, that's Hevel. If you remember what Hevel means over the last few weeks, Hevel is the Hebrew word for vapor or smoke. It's this idea that you see it, you can experience it in the moment, but it's quickly fleeting away. You can't grab a hold of it. As much as you try to grasp, as much as you try to to contain it, you cannot do it. It's like smoke or vapor. So it's fleeting. But he also uses it in an enigma. It's a paradox. It's things that don't really make sense. This is hard for me to understand, Lord. Has us kind of thinking this way as well. And so when we think about Hevel, we think about the paradox of work. We're thinking about the ideas that we toil and we labor ultimately for the fleeting vapor that it is. That in our work, we're hoping that we can try to create some sense of identity. We're grasping at an identity. We're grasping at purpose. But again, we recognize maybe we can't create and manufacture that in a way that's meaningful. Perhaps we can figure out who we really are by the toil and labor we produce. And then we get caught up and our entire identities are in those things. And to the teacher of Ecclesiastes, he says, the pursuit of finding your identity and meaning in your labor is a fleeting desire. It's like chasing the wind. Like in the case of the BlackBerry storm, we can attempt to create for ourselves meaning, identity through competition, through motivation of being the best. But he says that springs out from comparisons. That's the spring of that. The source of that is comparisons of envy and jealousy. And he's like, it's futile. It is futile. Go back with me to verse 4 here, the beginning of this passage. He says, and I saw that all toil, not just some toil, all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is Hevel. English means meaningless, but I don't know if that captures well that word of Hevel, the fleeting desires or the fleeting things that we desire, a chasing after the wind. Again, so the teacher is telling us that all of our work and achievement here is skillful work, success, talent, you can interchange all those words with that idea, comes from our envy. I think most of us might read that and go, well, that's kind of a generalization. How can you assume my motivations? That everything I'm doing and with toil is coming from a place of envy, that my success and talents are coming from a place of envy. And I think we need to break that down for a moment, that word moment, because there's a few ways that we might think about that in our English language, because the word here in Hebrew is the word kana. Kana. It just means to be jealous or envious or even zealous for it. In a way, God is kana for us. He's zealous for us. But in this context, it means something different. One thing it's not the word covet. I think sometimes we get that word envy and covet mixed up here. It's not the word covet that you would find in the Ten Commandments. It's not being jealous over other people's stuff, not the output of somebody necessarily, or the lusting after a person's spouse. We're not talking about that type of covet. In Ecclesiastes 4:4, kana describes a work ethic driven by insecurity. Think about that. A work ethic driven by insecurity. Am I enough? Am I doing enough? Am I lining up enough? Am I adding up enough? Maybe it's a jealousy that pulls us into constant comparisons. I have to be like that person down the street. I have to be like that other person in that other department. I have to be like that person who does the same thing I do. Maybe we don't even think of it in a way of jealousy, but we just see it as healthy competition. How do we frame that in our minds in order to see how it motivates us and drives us? And this is what Ecclesiastes 4 is talking about. This is kana. And I grew up as a big fish in a small pond. Moab was a small town, and as an athlete in a small town, I was never really challenged. And in a way, I was always one of the best when it came to things. And by my senior year, I probably was the best at most things that I did. I thought I was pretty hot stuff. I had all the little Letterman jacket things, and I had the first team All-States and the state records and these things that I thought, boy, this is what it means to be alive. But then I went to that next level, to that collegiate level. And I realized, boy, there is a huge insecurity in here because guess what? I am no longer the best. There are people out there who are a lot better than I was and am. And when I started to compete at those levels, I started to find myself slipping away into a place where my identity became how good was I competing. And I remember one of the most humbling moments that I had, I was in Texas for the Texas Relays. And it was probably 1,500, 2,000 people at this race. One of the biggest races in the country. And I line up, and this guy next to me is about probably 2 inches taller than me. And probably about 30 pounds heavier than I am. With big, he had these big dreadlocks at the time. And I remember I felt like a child standing next to a man, to be honest with you. And we race, and he just blows me out of the water. A couple years later, I see him on TV, and it was Robert Griffin III, RG3. He was a Heisman Trophy winner and a first-round draft pick in the NFL. But I remember racing and just being like, if this is what it means to be great, I will never be great. Because this guy was on a whole different level than I'd ever experienced in my life. It was a wake-up call, truly. I was never going to be able to compete at that level. And I think mentally, that did something in me because I never really have found the drive at that point to continue to compete because it was kind of one of those things where it didn't motivate me, it demotivated me. Like, why would I ever put so much into this if I'm not going to be the best? Looking back, I see that I tied so much of my identity in being an athlete, but realized I was never going to be my long-term excel. I was left asking really who I was because so much of my life had been in athletics and my identity had been in being the best. And when you realize that you're never going to be the best or you can't be the best forever, even ask RG3, he had kind of a quick slump and then everything went downhill. There's always somebody who's going to be better. I quickly discovered that my work ethic was driven from wanting to be the best. But when that collapsed, when that delusion completely fell apart, I realized it wasn't going to happen. So rather than enjoying the opportunities I had, I got caught up in the constant comparisons that robbed the joy of my labor. The constant comparisons that we do with other people who we feel threatened by, insecure by. It robs us of being able to enjoy the labor in the moment. I think this is what insecurity produces in us. It's a bit of a paradox as if we think about it. This insecurity of trying to compete from a place of comparisons and envy, it can drive us to be the best, sure, But if we tie all of our value, worth, and identity in these things, what happens when the inevitability comes when someone is better than we are? What if it leads us into competition, I think, which can be healthy, but it can also lead us into unhealthy comparisons? What if we do as we did with the Blackberry storm and we just completely lose ourselves in trying to beat out and compare to those people around us that we have no reason to compare ourselves to? We lose ourselves in those things. It leads us to work harder. Sure, you might work harder than you ever have, but at what levels of extremes will it take you? Do we work so hard for meaning and identity that we begin to mistreat the people around us? Because we see our organization, our institution, our departments, our churches as a success tied to our identity and purpose. I have seen this I've lived in corporate America and tech and all those things, but I have seen this the worst in pastors probably. Just because I think so often the identity and purpose of a pastor is placed into the success of the church and whatever that could mean. Usually it means numbers, something like that. And I've seen it kill pastors, literally in some ways. I've seen all of these in my time working in corporate America, but again, it's as prevalent, if not more, in the church. So while we may think we're working to provide a simple service, or even just, I just work to collect a paycheck, if we're really being honest with ourselves, if we're really looking ourselves in the mirror, there's a part of us that's working to provide ourselves with identity, worth, and value. If you really sit down and you really start thinking about, why do I do this? What motivates me? I think the closer we get to the idea of, I think Ecclesiastes is right. I think it all springs from an envy, a kana, of an insecurity, of wanting to provide some form of identity and purpose into my life that I'm trying to create or manufacture. Regardless of the nature of the job, I think Ecclesiastes is exposing something in our crooked hearts. That while on the surface, again, you might have good intentions about your labor, I think in reality, you're working to get a life. You're working to prove to somebody in your life. It could be somebody, your parents or grandparents, maybe it's a spouse, I don't know, but you're proving to someone, I'm worth this. This is my value. And I can remember back in the days where I was making some really crazy money, I can remember having that identity being like, boy, look what I provide. And Amy and I got in some pretty mean fights over the years where I was like, look at all this stuff I provided. Let me just be honest with you for a moment. And then you have that moment where God's like, I'm in the room. And you're kind of like, oh, what did I just say? To prove to someone, at least, that you have value and worth by what you do and create is a part of the motivation, I think, in everything that we do, to justify our existence in one way or another. And the teacher says, this way of life is hevel. It's fleeting. It's chasing after the wind. In fact, it's a paradox. It's an enigma that we believe about this world, this reality under the sun. And work cannot provide you with who you are. You cannot create for yourself a sense of self-worth, identity, and value. You cannot manufacture that. Those are things that are given to you. Those are things that you receive. You can't do it through toil. So the teacher gives us a riddle. He says, here's my response to this hevel of work. He says, in verses 5-6, he says, fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility, or you might see rest in your translations, than two handfuls with toil chasing after the wind. Classic Bible, right? Like, here's the answer. Here's a riddle. Now I want you to think about it for the rest of your life. What is he talking about here? Well, I think the kind of the way to unpack this is to understand the Hebrew word for hands, because there's three different kinds of hands he's talking about here. He says one is the fools fold their hands. So this is the Hebrew word yad, and yad is the hand to the forearm. So what does it mean to fold your forearms? Like this, right? Then it says better is one handful. That's kaf. That just means the open hand. So it's better to, it says over open hand. Have one open hand up. And then the other one is gripping fist. It's kafun. It's this idea of just reaching and grabbing for everything you can. Right? So there's three ways of using your hands here. that the teacher is telling us. And so the first one, fold your hands. A yod is your hand to your forearm, and it's folding of your hands, which just kind of is this kind of demonstration of, I'm just not even going to do it then. Or maybe it's sleep. I like the illustration of sleep. This is definitely how I sleep at home, right? Or it's kind of this idea of laziness a little bit. It's idleness. Like, well, what's the point in laboring then? If I can't find my identity and my meaning and my purpose and my worth, and it's all hell, what's the point of even doing it? And he's like, well, that's a foolish response. If you're going to fold your hands, it will lead you to ruin. He says, you have to labor. Humanity, as the very core of who we are, we were designed to work, to labor. It was a part of the experience. He says, bad things happen to us when we just sit idly by. If we have nothing to do, humanity it really struggles. So the teacher is not trying to say that labor is pointless, that there is no value in labor. So you should sit. So he doesn't say the answer is to not stop working. That's foolishness. It will lead to ruin. And then he goes, let's just jump to the last one here for a second. He says, is it then maybe gripping? Is it reaching for something? Is it the idea of grabbing everything you can? Is that the idea of a gripping fists? I think especially out of our insecurities, we tend to grab a hold of things with tight fists. If we're in something, especially if we're like, boy, this is going to give us meaning, identity, and purpose, and maybe this experiences that we like, we will hold on to those things with everything that we have, two hands with a gripping fist. We will milk all of the toil and labor we can possibly get from this. Yet we never fully realize just how fragile that is, how quickly that can change, how quickly that can be removed from our lives. We never really find what we're looking for, even in the moments that we feel like we found it. It will rob our value, it will rob our joy, it will rob our worth, but it doesn't stop us from trying to find it those places. I think it's the Hebrew illustration of what we would call today a workaholic. Someone who's continuously reaching and gripping and grabbing. Maybe this will be the thing. Maybe if I just spend those 60 hours a week in the office and I can prove to my family and those people that I'm worth something by all that I have sacrificed over the many, many years and provided everything they could ever imagine, then maybe I will have my identity in that. And we know through various cycles of history and patterns and studies of humanity, that does not bring identity, but it actually brings a crushing reality that none of that was ever going to fill your identity. The Bible will call that, I think, foolish and futile. There was a study done that asked people if there were 25 hours in a day, if there was one extra hour in a day, what would you do? What do you think the answer was? Sleep. Because we are so exhausted. We are so exhausted as a people that we're like, yeah, one extra hour of sleep would be wonderful, especially on a day like today, right? We were all up late last night. We were like, yeah, one extra hour of sleep, I'd take it. That was the number one answer. So he says there's a different way to live. Different way to live. It's the idea of better is an open palm. Now, it's just one hand of an open palm. I'll use my left hand. Better is an open palm. This is a posture where you have one hand out open and the other hand is at rest. So rather than folding both or gripping at both, one is open and the other one is resting. You are working rather than folding your arms. So you're doing labor. You're in the toil of labor in this world. You're not shutting down or quitting, but your palm remains open. Because you know things come and go. You're like, yeah, I'm just not going to hold on to these things too tightly. I'm just going to open palm these things. I don't grasp for control. And just as important, the other arm is at rest. So this arm is resting over here. It's a paradox because you're toiling from a place of rest. You're laboring, but you're at rest. You're carrying the burden of work in this world, but you're still at peace. Now, I think in true wisdom literature style, the teacher doesn't give us the practical answers on how to do this. He says, okay, now here's the key to do this. After this riddle, we're kind of meant to, here's this exposed thing in our lives where we go, oh, now what do I do with this? And I'm left reflecting on this. But I think Jesus meets us in this paradox of work. Jesus meets us in this paradox of work and how to toil at a place of rest, to have burden, but to also be resting at the same time. He says in Matthew 11, 28 through 30, probably one of the most famous things he says, and we talk about it a lot here. But I hope this passage meets you in a new way because of what we've learned in Ecclesiastes 4. It says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened." If there was a phrase that better captures probably our reality today, is weary and burdened, "and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Here's the paradox of work according to Jesus. You can try to shoulder the burdens and toil of work on your own. Ecclesiastes teaches us that you're free to do so. Hey, if you want to try to carry the labor and toil and all the burden of work on your own shoulders, go for it. It will crush you. It will crush you. Or Jesus invites you to take the burden of him. There's a burden of Jesus that we carry. But he says at the same time, you're toiling and you're a burden with me, I also give you rest. You're toiling, yet at rest. The world says you can toil and work to shoulder a life that attempts to create meaning, identity, and value and purpose. You can try to do that. But you'll find that you'll be misplaced and empty. And you'll find yourself maybe tied to a yoke that is not so gentle and humble. He says, or you can take on the yoke of Jesus. You can tie yourself to the one who, by definition, whose heart is gentle and humble. Taking on the yoke of his teachings, his life, his mission, his identity, his meaning. You're putting yourself in Christ. Saying, yeah, it's a burden. And it takes toil from time to time. There is labor that comes along with following Jesus. But he says at the same time, it's like sitting in the world with an open palm, allowing things to come and go, this fleeting of the world under the sun. Yet he's like, the burden, though, I carry with you is also light and at rest. You are resting at this place at the same time. It's like Jesus is completing the thought of Ecclesiastes 4 when it comes to the paradox of work. Here you will see where you're given an identity, given meaning, given purpose outside of the crushing demands of a world under the sun. The hard part is, he's like, will you receive that? Will you accept the invitation to take on my yoke? Or will we continue to try to find it ourselves in our labor and in our toil? Ecclesiastes is teaching us that humanity, again, it is crooked and broken. From the very first chapter, it notices this within humanity. And he says, every single one of us is filled with our own insecurities around this. We're all trying to fill what we feel like is going to give us meaning with our labor and our toil and our work. I think every single one of us, if we're really honest, we do this in one way or another. We're filled with our own egos and diluted with our own self-importance. Well, they can't do it without me, right? Especially if you're in a place of leadership. I think one of the hardest things is to trust people with your work, with your toil, with your business. Now multiply that by 7 billion people all doing that, and it gives a pretty good illustration of where we're at in this world, don't we? 7 billion people, all trying to live out of this place of insecurity and self-importance. It's crooked. All of us trying to build our lives. At least some of us, maybe a part of us, apart from Jesus, saying, maybe Jesus, you can take this aspect of my life, but with toil and work and labor, I think I got that. I think I'm doing pretty good here. I think I've got it pretty well under control. And I think today's the day where you're invited into this new place with him, is saying, hey, my burden is so much better because you're open-handed and at rest and trying to grip everything that comes along your way. And God's response here to this crooked and broken billions of people who continue to try to do things their own way was not to just destroy us. He's like, I'm going to send Jesus. God in the flesh to be with us, to become one of us. He became part of the system of brokenness. He was a part of the human experience of what it means to toil and labor. He had a job. He worked with other people. He understood what that meant. I mean, he was part of the family business most likely, right? Taking over his dad's business. I mean, how many of us can probably relate to that? But he did that. He came into this world so that he could take on the sin, the delusion, the insecurity, the ego, the pride, and envy of the flesh. He took all of that onto himself and he killed it on a cross. He became those things, as Paul would say. But at the resurrection, it opened up a way for us to be free from a life crushed by envy and jealousy and comparisons. Imagine that type of freedom, where you're not trying to compare yourself to your peers any longer, where you're not trying to live out a place of envy and motivation, thinking my life should look like this or look like that. Liberated by him every single day to be able to live with an open palm and to be at rest, saying, hey, what is this life under the sun? What is that measure comparison to what the Lord has done for me and what he has given me with an identity? A life that is in a world working in toil, but is at rest in him. This is something the world has no clue what we're talking about when we say that. To toil from a place of rest. To have identity apart from the things that we produce, apart from the experiences that we pursue, apart from all those things we try to measure up to. So maybe your father, your grandfather, or some sibling will go, maybe, yeah, finally you're worth it, to live apart from all of those types of heavy burdens and pressures. Or you can look at something and say, so what if someone's better than me? God died for me. So what if their company is more productive, more profitable than mine? The Lord loves me. So what if they make more money or have better stuff than me? God became flesh for me and died for me. He knew my name on that cross as he was suffering. He knew my name at the resurrection and said, you are mine. I am yours. You have a God who loves you, who died for you, who knows you, who are his child by faith, and he gives you rest. Ecclesiastes is teaching us here, no more striving in comparisons. Again, as the great Diane Van Arsdal would say, comparisons are the thief of joy. That's what my mom always told me all the time. I never listened, but I definitely heard that a lot of times. That we don't need to look any longer for identity in misplaced areas. And misplaced areas, and the number one place I think is probably in our labor and our toil, our professions. It's a very strong temptation. There's a lot of pressure there in order to find our identities there. But instead, Jesus says, find it all in me. He's like, I'm telling you, I am gentle and humble. Take my yoke upon you. Tie yourself to me, and I will give you rest. In fact, I will give you what your soul truly craves. The things that you feel like, those insecurities, those things you're looking for in all these other areas, you're not going to find them there. You're going to continue to search the short span of time that you're on this planet for 80 plus years. And you're not going to find it unless you find it in me. It's what your soul truly craves. And this has been the fun kind of byproduct of this series, is as we've explored all these little paradoxes, we see it all coming back to Jesus fulfilling those cravings, fulfilling those things that we are looking for deep into our souls. And he says, it's right here. I'm inviting you to participate. I'm inviting you to take on my life with you. And I'll close with this. And as Paul says in Colossians 3:17, he says, and whatever you do, whether in word or in deed, whether you speak or you labor, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus. He says, just do it all as if you are tied to Jesus. Do it everything as if you are completely immersed in the life of Jesus. Say, hey, when you go home, you're not accountable to your bosses or your managers. Maybe in some way there's a part of that. But he says, ultimately, you're accountable to your Lord Jesus. This is in word and in deed. Do it all in the name of him. Speak in the name of him. Labor in the name of him. Giving thanks to God the Father through him. So Paul's even saying you're giving thanks. Like, yeah, I know sometimes labor is extremely difficult. Sometimes toiling and it's hard and it's burning and we're tired and we're exhausted and we go through seasons of that up and down. He says, but give thanks to the Father. Give thanks to the provider in everything, that through him we can even have this opportunity to labor and toil. That we have this opportunity to work within our communities and to produce things. Those are good things, but do it in the name of the one who provided those things in the first place, who gave you your skills, your talents, your successes, the means to which you could even do any of it. That wonderful mind that you have in order to create and produce and to make decisions, that is a gift from God. That he says, remember where you got these things. Remember who provided these things.